Okay, so we're live now. I'm gonna make you host again, and then
Okay.
you will have to make me co-host.
Okay.
Can you make me co-host now?
I will. Afternoon, Franz. You're muted, but it's okay.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I found the right button.
Okay. It's a Franz.
Franz, yes,
Franz. That sounds very German.
it is actually. I'm an import. I'll be almost 60 years though.
Ah, you don't sound that German.
I grew up in an Irish neighborhood in New York, and I'm sorry I missed last week's class because I was on the road. Oh crap! I got
That's okay. The classes repeat. This one you mean about Lindisfarne and Iona.
that's the one. Yes,
Very good. Well, you got it today.
great. Looking forward to it.
Glad to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Got lots of familiar faces. Good to see folks again this afternoon. Saw some of you this morning, Melinda and Jane. And hi, Kathy. I've known Kathy for a long time through Get Set Up. She took some of my first classes months ago. And hi, Dania and Carolyn. There's another very familiar face. And Adriana, Jill, Jane, Joy. Great to have you all here this afternoon. At least it's afternoon where I am. Let's see. Very likely where afternoon where you are too, because it's 3:30 Eastern Daylight Time. That means it's at least 12:30 Pacific Daylight Time. Pardon me. So here's a fun thing, because Get Set Up, we go across the country from east to west. We actually go to Australia and have now people from UK. Times get very mixed up. So occasionally someone will send me a message about a class or something, and they're in their time zone, and I'm realizing, oops, that's not. I got to do a mental conversion here. What time zone we're in?
Hey, Russ, can I ask you a question?
You sure can.
I'm pretty new to Get Set Up, and I know it seems like a lot of the instructors mention a follow-up email, and I've never received a follow-up email for any class I've gotten. I get the reminders, but I wasn't sure whether my email is blocking that.
First of all, Michael here, who's our TA, might be able to help with that. From what I understand, there's a couple things that happen. If you've joined as a live learner, do you? Oh, maybe I should ask this question. Do you take the do you take the link from the email you get about the class? Is that how you join?
I think so. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, no. The only reason I'm asking is many people, there's an email. If you register, the email comes, and you follow a link in the email. But some people are just joined. They're just like, oh yeah, it's 3:30. They go in and they just join the class. You can do either way. But sometimes those are called live learners. Live learners may or may not get an email. I'm not sure. Michael, our great Get Set Up TA, by the way, I'm introducing Michael, who's with us here today, who can help you out. He'll monitor the chat and answer any questions. I'll make sure Michael and I look into that. But that was Dania Smith, Michael. If we get...
Yeah, got it. So Dania, I'm going to send an email in the chat. What you have to do is you just have to simply save that email as a contact, like copy the exact email. This is the one. It is notification@getsetup.org. Make sure it is notification without a plural, right? So you have to just simply save it in your contacts, and then you will be receiving emails, right? If the problem still persists, feel free to let me or us know, and we will help out further.
Okay, thank you. I just always worry I'm missing out on something. So
No worries. If you have registered prior to the class with the email, you should be getting an email from that. And if you're not getting an email, this is the solution that we usually, come up with, and this usually helps everyone.
all right, thank you.
Michael, just a point of, it doesn't always work, and a lot of get set up ever since they redid their website in April has really messed up a lot of people's getting notifications.
Yeah,
and I've
I-
spent a lot of time on so I'm you can try that, but it doesn't always solve the problem. So there's, especially with Comcast people, it used to work, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work
Yeah,
anymore.
if it doesn't solve the problem, feel free to send your email to me in the private chat, and I will be sure to let that email over to the support team, and they will look into it and get back to you.
I finally ended up having to sign up with another email after weeks of trying to fix it.
Whatever works, but yeah, I'll be sure to help any one way or the other. If it doesn't work, feel free to hit me with your email, and then I'll be sure to send that email over to the support team.
Hey, Michael, I actually tried to switch to another email thinking maybe my email service was blocking it. And when I went to the Get Set Up site, it told me I wasn't allowed to change my email for security reasons. And when I
Exactly.
went to
So one account can be registered for one email, right? So email is the thing that registers an account. If with the other email, you will have to make a new account.
Oh, so you can't change the email.
Yeah, I tried that with tech, and
Okay.
you just have to go in and sign up again. So you end up having two accounts with them.
Sounds like that's something we need to work on. So we'll take note of that little practical thing. I'm glad. Thanks for bringing it up, though, Danya. I sure want you to be able to get notes after the class.
It's something that started happening in April with you guys, because before that I wasn't having any trouble. And when you rework the website.
April 20th, they stopped with Comcast being able to do a lot of things. So I don't know whether that had anything to do with it too, but April 20th, they did have a lot of problems. Comcast stopped a lot of things.
Okay. Well,
Your tech department and Comcast tech department need to get together on it.
Yeah.
good to see everyone this afternoon.
I have a question.
Yes, Jane.
One of the programs that you have, Travel Solo, that's coming up in 2 days, it says that it's not going to be. Is that true?
Wow. No, as far as I know, it's going to be. Tell you what, while we're here, let me just go check.
It said to
schedule.
me that it's not going to be.
Let me check classes. I'll check the schedule while we're on, because that is one I encourage you all to come. That's Wednesday the 5th.
Right.
And it should be, let's see, that should be at 2:30. Traveling Solo is still there, and there's 36 seats.
Oh, I
So-
pressed it and it said that it's not going to be. Isn't that interesting? I did it
That
just
is
before
interesting.
we came on. Okay, I'll just try again after this class.
Yep, try again. I just checked it right now. I was able to book it. So,
Okay, thank
but
you.
thanks for bringing that up. I'm glad you mentioned that. We sure want you to be able to take that class. That's really a good class. I look forward to teaching that one. It's a panel discussion, and those of you that were here last week will know that we had some great panelists. They're coming back again, Regina and Randy. And we'll talk about traveling solo. Also, Wednesday evening, we will talk about how to travel safely. And I look forward to anybody who wants to come and share your experiences with how you travel safely to sure come and join, because it'll be a discussion, not just a presentation. And I'm aware, since I'm a man, that men and women perceive safety and experience safety different when they are traveling. So I sure want to have the point of view of women coming into the class. Good to have you all here this afternoon. If you all wouldn't mind just put in the chat where you're from. It's always a nice section where everyone else in the class is from. A lot of feedback tell me, oh, I love seeing where everybody's from. I like to know that. And Carolyn said she's joining us today from the hospital. So Carolyn, we hope you get better soon. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Russ. I just had knee replacement today.
Well, let's
I'll
hope
be
that
up for, I'll be up walking in a few hours.
you will be. You will
Yes,
be.
yes.
They they get you up and moving when they replace those joints.
And it's okay. I'm gonna be dancing soon.
All right, good. Well, you can join that line dancing class. There's
That's right.
who does the line dancing? I'm drawing a blank on the dancing classes.
Shirley.
Surely, we have great dancing classes. So come and join that. We have yoga. There's all sorts of classes you can take. Keep moving. Unfortunately, my class is about moving, but you have to sit through the class. So you join me while I'm moving through space in the past. Oh, that's great. We've got, let's see. So I'm just checking the chat here. We've got Dania's from Cincinnati. Great. Welcome. Jill is from Michigan. Kathy's from Grove City, Ohio. Chris is from Sonoma County, California. France is from Statesboro, Georgia. Beverly's from Gainesville, Florida. And, well, Adriana is from Israel. Is that now from Israel or just that's where your home is?
No, actually live there.
Right now.
I've been living here for quite a long time.
Excellent. Well, no, I'm just glad to see somebody from a very different time zone joining into our class. Wonderful.
Actually, Ty let me know about who does the Tai Chi, let me know about this Nicholas that he does Tai Chi. So I joined his class there, and then I realized there's so many other interesting classes. So I started, basically visiting those other classes, and yours was one of my choices.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad you joined us. Get Set is a worldwide organization. We do classes in India and Australia. I think we're starting up in the UK, of course, Canada and the US. So, but anywhere in Europe, if you can get on, you can join. So I'm really glad to have you here, Adriana. Welcome. Let's see. Melinda's from St. Augustine, Florida. Margaret's from Silver Spring, Maryland. One of our guides. Scott is from Silver Spring. And Hiroko's from Manhattan. Welcome, Hiroko. And Michael's from Mars. Well, that's how I feel where I'm from some days, from Mars. Glad to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share with you. And I'm going to rotate between a few different tabs here in Chrome. So let me start with this, which is Iona and Lindisfarne. And then I'm going to pop out for a second to a map. And then we'll come back to the presentation. You should see something that says a pilgrimage to Iona and Lindisfarne, Britain's Holy Isles. We see that, everybody? Excellent. Good. I always like to make sure that's showing up. That's Lindisfarne, by the way. I'm Russ Eanes, your guide. I'm from Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is in the lovely Shenandoah Valley. And we're having a very nice day here, a bit misty and then sunny and just in the 70s. It's perfect. My favorite time of year, early May. I'm a writer, a walker, and a cyclist. I formerly was a book publisher. And when I was a publisher, my favorite thing was to help shape an author's ideas into a book. And I love the energy that I get from working with older adults. You give me a lot of wisdom. And that's why I'm now a full-time guide with Get Set Up. We help you learn wonderful, useful skills from people like you so you can do wonderful things. We learn from each other. Ideally, we can see you and your cameras are on. And I like to do a lot of discussion in my class. So at the end, if you've got questions or observations, please bring them. We'll have a time when we're all together and you can ask your questions during the presentation. While I'm talking about Lindisfarne and Iona today, you are also welcome to put your questions in chat and Michael will note your questions or observations. You can request a recording after class. You can email help@getsetup.io. And if anyone is joining by live stream, the best way to participate is to join us and register for a class, and you get to be here live and ask questions. And lastly, Get Setup's an educational organization only. We're not paid to promote any specific products. I'll start you off with this quote that says, there are places in this land where heaven and earth have touched, changed lives, and transformed landscapes. And that's how I feel about Lindisfarne and Iona. And I made a pilgrimage there in 2016. I'll show you in a map in a minute where they all are, but we'll first define a pilgrimage. It's a journey to a sacred place or shrine, or any long journey or search, especially one of exalted purpose or moral significance. And over the years, I've done a lot of pilgrimages. The one that stands out the most to me was walking 500 miles along the Camino de Santiago in Spain. That took me 5 weeks, but also I did one to Assisi in 2019, the last time I traveled. And when I went to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, I walked by myself, but my wife joined me the last week, which was really nice. I enjoyed having her with me. And we went together then in 2019 to Assisi. We walked about 100 miles along a route called the Way of St. Francis, or the Via di Francesco. And that has I'm doing a class on that Thursday. If you're interested, I'll make sure I put that in the class notes. That's Thursday, 4:00 Eastern Daylight Time, if you would like to find out about that pilgrimage. But before I went to either of those places, I went to Iona and Lindisfarne. I didn't walk the whole way there. It was a journey by plane and train and taxi and bus and ferry, several ferries to get there, and I'll share a little bit about those. Now, I'm going to exit out of here for 1 second just to show you a map of where these places are, to give you some perspective. And there's the UK, United Kingdom, and Ireland. And Iona is here. Whoop, that zoomed in a little too fast. We'll get rid of that thing there. Make that go away. There we go. Iona is off the coast of Mull. And this is the island of Mull right here. It's kind of a backward C shape. These are the Inner Hebrides on the western coast of Scotland. And Iona is a little island off Mull. You hardly know it's there. You have to go way out here to the end of Mull, and there is Iona. And to get there, you have to take a ferry, obviously, across this little sound right here between Finnefort and Iona. But you also, I took a bus across Mull, and I took, I keep zooming in on me. Look at that. You have to take a ferry from Oban, which is this town right here, over to Craignour, and then you catch a bus. And to give you some perspective on that, where that is, down here, a couple hours by train or bus or taxi, is Glasgow, and not far from Glasgow, about half an hour, is Edinburgh. So this is all southern Scotland. And then if you go down a little bit farther south of Edinburgh, you come to this place called Berwick upon Tweed, and that's where the Tweed comes into the North Sea right here, Berwick upon Tweed. And just south of it is Holy Island, or Lindisfarne. And Lindisfarne is unique, and I'll describe this when I talk about it a little bit later, in that it is an island twice a day, and twice a day it's a peninsula. That's because the North Sea comes in through here and makes it an island, but during the day, when the tide is low, there's a causeway that actually goes out here, and it's paved and asphalt, so cars and buses can take it. But there's also a route that people can walk across on foot, and you'll find out a little bit about that through the sands. So twice a day an island. Iona is always an island, and there is bus service and train service to Berwick upon Tweed. And just to give you a little sense, Berwick is also the River Tweed is often thought of as kind of the border of England and Scotland when they were kind of separate countries. Of course, the Scots still think they're separate countries. At least that's how I perceive it. And this is the Tweed going along through here. And this area where the Tweed goes through Kelso and St. Basil's and Selkirk is called the Borders, because it was the borderland between England and Scotland, a place where there was a lot of fighting back and forth over the years. So to give you some perspective, when I went to these places, I flew into Edinburgh, and I took the train over to Glasgow, a train from Glasgow to Oban, beautiful train ride through the mountains. Took a ferry from Oban to Mull, took a bus across Mull to Fionnefort, where then I took a ferry over to Iona. So it's an all-day trip. You go very slowly. Fortunately, it is gorgeous scenery, so I didn't mind however long it would take me. But before I went to Iona, the first place I went to, I flew in Edinburgh. I spent a day and a half and down at Lindisfarne. So I took the train when I got to Edinburgh first down to Lindisfarne, and then took the train back to through Edinburgh to Glasgow. Did this over several days. There are tours you can take of both places. Someday I'd love to be a tour guide leading groups to it. But anyway, there are tours that will take you to each of those places, and buses. So that gives you some sense of geography. And again, here's that map that shows you, a little bit farther ahead of Scotland, with Iona here and Lindisfarne down here. So I want to see a quick view of Scotland. Now, one thing that ties both of these places together, and they are very closely tied together because monks from Iona came to Lindisfarne to found a monastery there, is they also are both home to two of the most famous illuminated manuscripts in the world, possibly, but certainly in the United Kingdom and Ireland. One is called the Lindisfarne Gospels. That's here on the left. And on the right is the Book of Kells, which is also actually a book of Gospels. And these were done in the 8th century, 7th and 8th century, get my years right, by monks who originally had come from Ireland. And this is part of their beautiful tradition of what's called illuminated or decorated manuscripts. And they got all sorts of interesting dyes that they used to color the manuscripts with pen. This was part of the work that the monks had in those places. The Book of Kells is in Trinity College, the library of Trinity College in Dublin. I've seen it there. And the Lindisfarne Gospels is in the British Library, and I've also seen that. They're just beautiful. Here's just a map to give you an idea of Iona, which is only 3 miles long and not even a mile wide, and is just a beautiful, rugged place. You'll see some pictures of this. There's a village where the ferry comes into. There is, of all things, a 3-hole golf course. Whoops, we went. Sometimes my mouse does that. There's a 3-hole golf course on the western side of the island. And the highest point is a hill called Dun E, and I'll show you a picture of Dun E because I climbed it. Let me back up here. Iona has been settled for approximately 4,000 years, but its fame began with St. Columba in 563 AD. So you keep that in mind. That's 6th century, 563 AD. There were already people had come there, but St. Columba was an Irish monk, and he had gotten into a conflict, and there had ensued a bloody little war between some tribes in Ireland. And when it was over and the dead were counted, he was so stricken with grief over what he'd caused that he exiled himself with several other monks from Ireland. And the place they went to was Iona. I'm going to skip back up here to this map one section just to give you an idea. These Western Isles of Scotland are actually very close to Northern Ireland. And the Western Isles of Scotland and the Northern Ireland actually share a common cultural heritage. This is where there are still people that speak Scotch Gaelic, which is related to Irish Gaelic. And they were, it hit me when I was on Iona that the fastest way to get from one place to another in ancient times, up through the medieval times, was by water. And so you see all these islands, they could go quickly from one end of Scotland, the islands, to another much more quickly than they could walk. In fact, land is sort of a barrier. And that's the mind shift I had to have when you begin to understand these holy islands and the Western Isles of Scotland, because water was their fastest mode of transport. It was also made them very vulnerable to the Vikings. We'll find out about that a little bit later. This, by the way, is Iona, and this is the abbey, not the one founded by Columba in 563 AD, but one a later Benedictine foundation in the second millennium, about 13th century. Back in the time of Iona, this is what an Irish monastery actually looked like. This is one from Ireland. This is Glendalough, which is south of Dublin. This is what it looked like before the year 1000, with its Irish tower, with its tall tower, which many of you'll see all over Ireland. And the buildings, there's a few stone buildings, maybe a church and maybe a scriptorium. But I'm skipping ahead here. Most of the buildings were done with stone and thatch roof. And here's a curious thing. The Irish monks were often married. Actually, celibacy for priests and monks was not expected of the church in Ireland until probably 13th or 14th century or later. So it might seem strange to us that the monks were married, but they were. And so they would have had families living around them here. The Irish concept of church and monastery was very different than it was anywhere else in Europe. That's because the Irish didn't build cities and towns. They tended to live in these larger settlements like this, which were agricultural. And when they founded monasteries, they just picked the same sort of settlement pattern. And so when Columba came from Ireland to Iona, he was actually part of the same broader culture of this Gaelic culture that went from Ireland all the way up through the Western Islands of Scotland. And so when they settled, he would have had a monastery that eventually looked something kind of like this. And again, that's what it looks like today. That's the later Benedictine monastery, which is the center of it. The original settlement of Columba is gone. We don't have it. There's no remains of it anywhere. And after he died, there was a chapel built, and people came to Iona for well over 1,000 years to do pilgrimage. His remains were buried, and his remains were also carried about in places around Scotland. But there was a chapel you could go to as a pilgrim to visit him and seek a miracle or something you needed. So what we see here is a later Benedictine establishment foundation, and even that fell into disrepair and disuse, largely because in the time of Henry VIII and the Reformation, they dissolved the monasteries in England and Scotland. And the modern Benedictine monastery that's there was rebuilt starting in 1938 by George MacLeod, who had a vision that Iona would again be a place that people could go to, a place for retreat, a place to experience outdoors coming from the city, especially from Glasgow, which was kind of a dirty city. So he founded the Iona community in 1938, which still exists, and which is a leader in that people go there for retreat, but also they emphasize ecological sustainability. They have other places and in Scotland, and it's just a beautiful place. Thousands of people visit every year still, like I did when I went there in 2016. Also, in the 13th century, they established a nunnery. So there was a monastery for women. And it's also gone. At least the buildings are in ruin, and this is one of the ruins, and they are some of the most beautiful ruins. And if any of you have been to ruins of monasteries or churches in England, they're often preserved, the ruins, and they're beautiful. They have lawns and gardens around them. They're some of the most beautiful places you've ever seen. That's what I've experienced traveling pretty broadly throughout England and Scotland. You cross over to the village of the island of Iona on a ferry, and it's still a town where there's fishing boats, and there are many farms, what they call crofts, which are small working farms. And again, you can see the Benedictine Abbey. This hill up behind it is Dunhee. Dun is the Scottish Gaelic word for something like a hill or a small mountain. They also have the word ben, which is what they call mountains. But Dun would be a a hill, and many times also there were forts on top of the hill. So often there are names of forts or castles even that are built on top of hills, and they're doing this or doing that. But Duni is the highest point on Iona. That's the village you see as you approach on the ferry. Very charming place. There's the path up to Duni. It took me about half an hour to climb to the top. It's longer than it looks, and you can't just scramble straight up the rocks. You have to kind of zigzag your way to the top. And I did get to the top, where you have a fabulous view, 360 degrees all around. And this view here is looking north. So you're looking up to more of the inner Hebrides. And it was when I was up there looking that it suddenly dawned on me, Columba hadn't chosen a place of refuge that was isolated. He'd actually chosen a place that was right in the middle of the highway, so to speak, for people traveling up and down through the islands all the way to Ireland. And even though he couldn't see Ireland, that was kind of his enforced penance, plenty of people could come from Ireland. Again, it was a part of a wider culture, Western Scotland and Ireland. And so Iona became not only a place of mission where people went out from, but also was a place of learning. And so you saw that decorated manuscript I showed you. That's what the monks spent part of their time doing, was making those decorated manuscripts. They used vellum, which is made from calves. And I think I read that something like 500 calves would have been sacrificed to have made the Book of Kells. I'll tell you a little bit about the Vikings coming, but after they decided that they need to get away from the Vikings, the monks of Iona eventually retreated to Kells, which is a monastery in Ireland, and that's where they took the book with them. But Iona became a center of mission, and if anybody read the book, came out a long time ago, gosh, I want to say 25 years, How the Irish Saved Civilization. The idea is that Irish monasteries became a seat of learning and literature. They copied manuscripts from antiquity, and they sort of preserved a lot of the knowledge and learning of the ancient peoples and copied them. And they also went out from Iona all over, eventually from Iona to other places, and then from there eventually over into Europe, the Irish monks, and founded monasteries all the way into Switzerland and through France. And they were places of learning. So learning was preserved by them as they went out. And one of the places that I'll get to in a second where they went was Lindisfarne, which is on the other side of Scotland. But back in the 6th century, that's when Iona founded his monastery. And this is, again, a beautiful view across the Sound of Iona, back toward the mainland. I actually stayed in a B&B back here, place called Fiona Fort. That's where you catch the ferry to come over from the mainland, from the island of Mull over to Iona. And this is looking east. Iona still has farm land there, and there's, like I mentioned, these small working farm, the crofts. So you see sheep all over the island. Iona is also famous for its decorated crosses, these carved decorated crosses. The one on the left, the cross of St. Matthew, is a replica. So this is what the original looked like. It's an exact replica. The pieces of the original are in a museum on Iona, and you can see those, but they put this replica back in the holder where the original was, so you can get an idea of what it looked like. The one on the right, St. Martin's Cross, is the original. That is from the 8th or 9th century. And the idea of these decorated crosses, the people couldn't read back then, was they drew all sorts of, through the illustrations, they were telling stories. And so a priest or someone else might explain what all the decorations on a cross meant. And of course, decorated in the style of the Celts with interweaving patterns. They're beautiful works of art, and there are more of them. There were originally 4 or 5 on the island, and the remains, if they're not in place, like the cross of St. Martin's, they're in the museum. There's a small museum on the island.
Russ, real quick, I'm curious. Did they use patterns because of the no graven images thing?
No, that's part of their culture. And if you've seen any kind of Celtic artwork, the intricate woven patterns that repeat are a part of Celtic artwork. I actually have a ring right here. I'll hold it up. You can see it. I don't know if it works. It's what they call a Celtic knot. My wife and I got these for each other in our 25th anniversary. They're silver. And this idea of interwoven patterns, and you can see this anywhere in Celtic art. So maybe I need to do a class sometime on Celtic art. It's part of this sense of the ongoing nature of life, of the interwovenness of all living things. And it is beautiful and it's ingenious. I actually have books on Celtic artwork patterns and have tried my hand at a little bit of it. And yes, so that's the tradition, the Celtic tradition of, and there are other things. There's the spiral, which is another very popular motif in Irish and Celtic art. But the interwoven patterns on crosses, you'll see those a lot in Ireland as well as in Scotland. This is just a little ditty here. When they rebuilt the monastery, the original Benedictine monastery, starting in 1938, some of the capitals are the stones at the top of an arch, which then form a link between, the top of a column, which then form a link between the column and an arch above it. Those are called the capitals. They did a lot of them in, they did beautiful carvings with new artwork. And I just thought a lot of the new artwork was just as beautiful as anything that might have been done in the Middle Ages. This is St. Mary's Church. That's on Lindisfarne. This is the church on Iona, which has been restored enough that you can go in it. The parish church, beautiful. This dates, I believe, from the 13th century. And that's a look back across the Sound of Iona. And notice how blue the water is. And this, where it's lighter blue, there is beautiful white sand. This place right here is called the Bay of the Martyrs. And that's because starting in 793, the Vikings began to raid the coast of Britain and Scotland. And they raided them repeatedly. They discovered that the monasteries had wealth because they had, like gold chalices. They had the beautiful illustrated manuscripts. And so they started raiding them for loot. And they were also easy to get to because the Vikings had their very fast longboats. And so these monasteries were in places like Lindisfarne or Iona, which were easy to get to, and they could raid. And this is a beach where a large number of monks were martyred and killed by the Vikings. I think this was from the last Viking raid. And again, a beautiful, beautiful beach with white sand and beautiful blue water just really struck me. I had a real hard time finding a way to capture how blue that water was. On the back side of the island, it's very rocky. This is looking west. I'm actually sitting on the edge of the golf course. There's a 3-hole golf course. Nothing like you can imagine if you know an American golf course. These are golf courses that the Scots make their golf courses wild. And in fact, the golf course is kept trimmed by sheep. So I think when you hit your ball, you have to watch out that you don't hit the sheep. But it's a very small feature of the island. But I think for the Scots, golf is a big outdoor activity, a physical activity, not like in the U.S. where we have large groomed courses and people drive around in golf carts. No golf carts there. Now, going over to the other side of Scotland is Iona. Is Lindisfarne, pardon me. Lindisfarne has been settled for 5,000 to 10,000 years, probably even longer than Iona. But the Celtic community there dates to 634. There was a Saxon king. And to give you a quick little history, when the Romans left Britain in the 5th century, the Saxons and the Angles came across the North Sea from northern Germany. And they eventually ruled. They came in large enough force, and that's why we have Anglo-Saxon, or the language we speak, which is English, which comes from Angle. And one of the early Saxon kings was very impressed with the Irish monks and asked one of them if they could start a monastery in Northumbria, which is where Lindisfarne is. And so the community in Iona sent Aidan as a bishop to begin the community in Lindisfarne. Like Iona, it has a church from the later Middle Ages and a monastery from the later Middle Ages. So this is the ruins of their church and monastery from the 13th, 14th, and 15th century. Beautiful sandstone, and like many other places in England, a beautiful ruin. But Lindisfarne is unique in that it's an island twice a day at high tide. At low tide, you can actually walk across, and this shows you actually more like the tide coming in. If you want to walk it from the mainland, you can. These are called the sands, and there are poles marking the way across. They really recommend that you not try it anytime near when this tide might be coming in, because it can be very dangerous. They also say sometimes the sands aren't very good to walk on, so they recommend people don't walk across it. But there is a pilgrimage you can make to Lindisfarne from the borders. It's a few hundred kilometers, or 50, 60 miles. I've walked part of it. And you can end up on Lindisfarne by foot if you can arrive at low tide. Giving you an idea of what Lindisfarne looks like, much smaller than Iona. And this right here, you can see this is the causeway coming in, the roadway that buses and cars take. And this little dotted line shows you the Pilgrim's Causeway, where pilgrims can walk across. Most of what is on Lindisfarne is concentrated in a very small village down here, very beautiful. There is, curiously, a castle. There's nothing to do with the monastery. This is a later 15th century castle, which is partly in ruin. And then there's the ruins of the monastery are down here, but this is also a very nice working village, a very charming place to stay. This is the village. I stayed there in a hotel. Like any place near the coast in England, full of roses and beautiful flowers, including what you see everywhere along the coast in England, which is valerian, which is kind of a herbal flower, which, by the way, is not, even though it's everywhere along the coast of the UK, is not native. There are 3 retreat centers on Lindisfarne, so a lot of people go to Lindisfarne for retreats, and they have beautiful gardens like this. I love the lupines in this place. And always, I love the colors of the fences or whatever. I think that's lilac. And this is a look across the small inlet to the castle. And you can see that sailboat sitting up on its own sort of stilts, showing that it must be low tide. And Lindisfarne is also, because it's a working fishery. There's people that go out on fishing boats from there. And it's also there's farming. So there's, just like on Iona, there are sheep. There's the valerian growing along the coast. This is the path going to and from the castle. And you can walk up to the northern edge of the sands. A very beautiful walk, very wild. And I love the stone piles here, and really enjoy that. Just a beautiful walk all the way around the island, very peaceful. And one of the nice things about it, this is a little secret, is that because it's an island twice a day, there's a point where the tour buses have to leave because they're not going to be able to get out. So what I found was that by late afternoon, the tour buses had left for the day. And so the village was beautiful and quiet in the evening. Also built from the beautiful red sandstone, and you can see more of these carved crosses in Lindisfarne because they came from Iona. This is part of the same tradition that began in Ireland and went all the way through Iona to Lindisfarne, the same Celtic monastic tradition. Probably the most famous person that ever was on Lindisfarne was St. Cuthbert. St. Cuthbert was a shepherd up in the area I showed you earlier, the borders. And when St. Aidan died, the first bishop and founder of the community, Cuthbert supposedly saw bright lights out off in the distance, and he went to find them, and he found his way to Lindisfarne, where he became a monk. He became very famous there, and he actually had a small island just south of Lindisfarne where he went and lived for a time as a hermit. And when the Vikings raided, his grave also where he was buried also became a place of pilgrimage. And rather than have his grave looted, they carried his body somewhere else. He was so famous, St. Cuthbert, that people still wanted to come and venerate him. So they built a cathedral. They took his body to Durham, and they built a cathedral over it. Someday I'll do a class on cathedrals in England. Durham is one of the most fabulous cathedrals you can ever see. It's Romanesque with enormous columns. This is the inside of St. Mary's Church. Yes, someone had a question.
Yeah, so Melinda is asking, can you stay in Lindisfarne or Iona?
Yes, you can stay in both. They both have good lodging options. There are hotels and retreat centers. I think they both have about the same amount of places you can stay, though because it's a little easier for tour buses to get in and out of Lindisfarne, I think it's more visited, especially by tour buses. And I stayed in both. I actually stayed across from Lindisfarne, from Iona in the village, just across the ferry ride, a 5-minute ferry ride. But I also stayed on Lindisfarne. Fabulous places to stay. Yes.
Reason
Thanks.
I ask is I know that like Mont Saint Michel is the same way. It's just absolutely awful during the day when all the tour buses are there. And same way, it becomes an island, later. So in that case, if you make your reservation and to just stay that evening and arrive at 4:00 after the buses, then you've got, like you said, the island to yourself.
You have the island to yourself. And it also happened that I was I spent an entire day there hiking and taking pictures and watching the birds, which are fabulous. If you've never seen the meadowlarks or skylarks, you're missing something. And during the times when the tour buses had to leave, it was just so nice and quiet on the island. And really most of the concentration of people is right around the very center. There's nice coffee shops and cafes. For me, a place to go to have tea and scones.
Is the only way you can get there then by bus and then wait for another bus, or are there ferries?
No, there's not a ferry. The only place to get on and off the island is that causeway. And when it's at high tide, the paved causeway is impassable. I arrived because it was the first place I went. I flew into Edinburgh and took a bus from the airport downtown, caught a train to Berwick upon Tweed, or Berwick. And from there, I caught a taxi because it's about a 5 or 6 mile ride out to the island. You do have to check your tide schedules when you're traveling there. Very important that you know your tide schedules. You don't want to discover there is, by the way, I think starting in June, over June, July, and August, there is a bus which stops actually right at the causeway, so you can walk there if you want to. So that's a bus, a north-south bus. It doesn't go onto the island. It's like a local bus, and it will go up to Newcastle. Comes from Newcastle up to Berwick, and so you can signal and get off at the island. Again, you walk across the causeway, but once again, you have to check your tide schedules. You don't want to find yourself stranded.
How long will walk if you were walk the causeway like the highway, the road, as opposed to the sand?
It's about a mile. Okay. It's not far. And the causeway's longer than the sands. The sands are a little bit shorter. I stuck this in here because this is very important. This is when the Vikings started raiding. So you can see Lindisfarne was the first of these famous monasteries they hit. That was in 793. And I guess they figured out that they must have learned after they were there, there's a monastery on the other side. And so the Vikings went all the way around and they hit Iona 5 years later. Oops. And you shouldn't think, though, that they didn't go in other places in between. They did. But gives you an idea. Much later, they went down up the Thames and to Garhampton, these various places where the kind of famous Viking raids. Honestly, the Vikings, they kind of displaced the Saxons and eventually came to rule England. And so when William the Conqueror came from Normandy in 1066, and by the way, Normandy was settled and ruled by the Norsemen. So even though he was a Norman Frenchman or Norman French, he was a descendant of Vikings in 1066 when he came over. And King Harold, who was king of England, which is about this part of the island, was a Danish king. He was the last of the Danish kings. And by then, the Danes considered themselves English. One thing you learn about English culture and history is that essentially they just absorbed every culture that came in. They didn't displace them. So the Danes came, and if I have my history correct, I don't know if there are any Saxon names in England, but there's lots of Danish names. A lot of towns have Danish names. So York is Jorvik. That was the Vikings or the Danes, the kings of the Danes. So again, you have a meshing of cultures, not necessarily displacing of people. So the Danes came to rule. So this just gives you an idea. And it was after a much later raid. I believe Iona was raided 3 times by the Vikings. And after the 3rd raid, that's when the monks said, that's it. And they left and they went back over to Ireland, which is actually right over here. Not sure why it doesn't show it. Ireland is right there. And they went to Kells. And that's why the Book of Kells, which was created on Iona, ended up in Ireland. They would say that the Lindisfarne Gospel is actually theirs too, but who's going to quibble at this point with the British over that one? Let me pause here and ask if there are questions about Lindisfarne and Iona. I visited there in 2016. But I first read about Iona in about 1991, 1992. So my desire to go there was very old. I was really glad I got my chance finally to go there. And at the end of my visit, my wife came and joined me. We spent 2 more weeks in the UK. I think I've shared about York. I spent a week in York and a week in Edinburgh after that.
There's a series called The Vikings. I forgot what channel it was done, and it's now on a lot of the streaming ones. And it does a pretty good job of giving you a sense of what it was like in the early, when they hit England and why they were hitting England, and sort of the thing of, well, do we settle and make use of this farmland? And then it goes on, and I didn't realize how true a lot of it was. I thought mostly it was just initially one of those, just a TV show. But then it does show them raiding Paris and exactly how Paris and the French was taken over by the Norsemen. And that's why, like you said, Normandy was Normans from the Vikings when they raided Paris. And, some of those scenes were really interesting of how they scaled them, how they took Paris, which was a walled city at the time.
And they went a long way. I mean, they went all the way into Russia. Anywhere the Vikings could get by boat, they pretty much went, including North America. They had very good ships. And Melinda, I didn't see all that series, but I saw enough of it that to give me, it is pretty true to life. It also gives you an idea of the Vikings displacing the Saxons. And I guess the way I look at England, whenever there was a power void, somebody else came in, and that's what happened initially to the Romans when they left in about the 5th century, when they pulled all their legions out of Britannia and went back to Rome. And again, we also imagine the Roman legions as a bunch of Italian Romans coming there. No, the Roman legions were full of people from all over Europe, including a lot of the Britons.
Well, and they also, I guess from the early part, did show them raiding finding the gold in these monasteries and things, which was it's kind of like the second gold rush.
That's right. Yeah.
And the not too nice things that happened to the friars. So yeah, a lot of what you were talking about, they actually did a pretty good job of showing.
When they renovated that monastery I was showing you on Iona in the 1950s, it's still under renovation, but when they did some significant renovation in the 1950s, they found gold coins buried, 300 of them. So somebody knew the Vikings were coming and buried the gold. More questions?
I have
Kathy?
a question about the Gospels. Are those the Christian Gospels?
Yes. So it's the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yep. Yes, and they're both gospels. Even though the Book of Kells says Book of Kells, it's actually got that. It's the Gospels. They copied a lot the Gospels and the Psalms.
Actually, I think at the library, they turn one page a day. So that a different page is on view each day.
Is that the Book of Kells you're speaking of?
Yeah.
I think I misspoke about the Lindisfarne Gospels. I think when I went to the British Library specifically to see it, it was not on display, but I saw several other illuminated manuscripts that were almost as old. Someday I still need to get back to the British Library. Of course, I'll check first before I go to make sure it's on display.
Russ, was there a reason you stayed on Mull rather than Iona?
There was. I think that I was there in May, and I'm sorry, I was there in June. I beg your pardon. And June is their highest season, and I had a hard time finding lodging in June on the island. And because the ferries run so frequently, and it's just I don't know, it's a 10-minute ferry ride across the Sound. I just decided to stay on Mull. I had 2 nights in a bed and breakfast and 1 day on the island. I have the intention to get back to Iona for a longer time because I would like to actually circumvent the entire island on foot. There's quite something to see. I got to see much of it, but at the very south coast, there's a place where traditionally is a place where Columba landed, and there are fabulous stones all along the coast. I picked up rocks. That's actually one of my souvenirs I pick up when I travel. If I see some nice stones or rocks on a river or shore, I'll pick them up. And I have some beautiful stones that I picked up in both Iona and Lindisfarne. They're part of my collection. Well, you've been a great group. I really enjoyed this.
Do you have a favorite of the two?
Oh gosh. No, Melinda, I just can't choose. I will say this: Iona is a place you could spend more time. Iona, you could spend a week easily. Lindisfarne, 2 days, you've seen it all. So I would say maybe a little bit more Iona. It is also because it's more remote. You are less likely, even though I mentioned that the lodging was full when I was there, because it's more remote. It's not there are not as many tourists visit. I think people come more with a deeper spiritual sense. Whereas Lindisfarne, because it's easy for the tour buses to get in and out every day, it can get pretty overrun with tourists. That's why I say it's always nice when the tide comes in and the tour buses have to leave.
Well, that's why I asked, because in a case like that, you definitely want to be able to stay on the place at night after everyone's gone.
Yep. And Lindisfarne is so easy to get to. If you fly into Edinburgh, you can be there easily. Iona takes a good day to get there. So it's a worthwhile day. And also, if you're in Oban, which is where you take the first ferry out to Mull, there are ferries that go all over the islands from there. I have an ambition someday to take a ferry that does a kind of a navigation of all the islands, circumvents all them. So,
what else did you do in Scotland? I know you said you went up to John O'Groats, but
oh, I've done so much. Melinda, it'll have to be another class, but I've biked across Scotland, which was I biked from Land's End to John O'Groats. I'll have to do a class on that one. But my favorite biking was Scotland, up and over the mountains. Scotland is so rugged and remote. I love it. And the people are wonderful and friendly. And I also love England and Southern England. I've been down to South Downs and places. So, yeah, I've been all over. My wife and I spent a week in a town called Aberdour, which is very near Edinburgh. So we could go around Edinburgh. We went up to St. Andrews. We went over to Stirling, Dunfermline, different places with an easy drive of where we stayed in Aberdour to explore. So, been a lot of places, but Scotland still has a lot more for me to explore someday. Well, thanks everyone. You were a great group, and it's good seeing you all. And if you have a chance tonight at 7:30 Eastern Daylight Time, we've got Joanna Frank Kohler doing a class presentation on Cuba, their trip to Cuba. It's very good. So I recommend you come. Hope to see you there.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, thank you.